So now we have some time for a round panel discussion that'll be chaired by the Managing Director of the Tripartite Foundation, Mr. Alfonso Luengo. Both Mrs. Dr. Chung as well as Mr. Ramadorai will be part of this round panel.
Buenas tardes, queridos amigos.
Well, good afternoon, dear friends. Of course, social media are playing an increasingly important role in our lives. At 2:30 today, we had 238,000 followers. We've had as many as 900,000 and 900,000 impacts, 905,000 impacts. And the three top tweets today is the one I'm reading at the speed of light. Exchange of views, Japan, different cultures and visions, so on and so forth. The second one, regarding Mr. Maguro. Mr. Maguro explains the different training and methods and approaches in Japan. And he did mention that Japanese companies, Japanese workers have the habit of having a drink with their colleagues after work. That really raised a lot of attention. And these are very small details that improve your life. And Japanese people are very intelligent people, and therefore they take care of the smallest detail. So now we will have a round panel discussion. It's not going to be easy because most of the presentations or comments will be translated into one language or another. So I'd like to start with a question for all of our speakers who have been kind enough to accept our invitation and to share with us the main characteristics of their training systems. What are the main concerns in Spain? The reform that the government has recently approved, the reform of the Spanish system of training for employment, is not based on an agreement, as was the case in the past. However, I believe that social partners and the government have a lot of faith in the Spanish training system, and there was some agreement, actually. The agreement was that the system needed to be changed. So there was an agreement regarding the need to upgrade or to transform the system. In my opinion, the weaknesses of the Spanish system of training for development are not very easy to solve. We have different types of issues there. The most important one for someone such as myself who's just joined this world 3 years ago, it turns out that in Spain, vocational training is not highly appreciated. It has no reputation whatsoever. And it'll be very difficult to find a solution to that problem, a problem that has a lot to do with our culture in Spain. And I don't believe you will have that problem in South Korea or Japan, whose cultures are actually focused on training and education. I would like to ask Dr. Madurai Subramanian to tell us whether vocational training for employment in India enjoys a good reputation, if it is as important as it is in other Asian countries. This is my first question, to encourage speakers to share their knowledge with us. I'd like to know whether you have that problem in your countries and how you went about it in case you have that problem.
Vocational education in a country like India has been neglected for far too long. With the result, the youth were not seeing that as an aspirational program. A paper degree from a college or a university has been seen to be a lot more meaningful from a social point of view, and the parents or the children have not been exposed to vocational education. So what we have tried to do is to look at advocacy as one of the most important components of vocational education. When we say advocacy, to say that if you do something with your hands, you can have a standing in society, you can be respected for your capabilities, and you can earn a higher order of wages, and there is an upward path to skill and upskill yourself in the process. I think how do we do the advocacy is through a number of ways. One is through the social media where anybody, any icon, go to the field, go to the action, take a video, take a picture, and then broadcast it, and then tweet or retweet, etc. Put Facebook pages or any other pages for those people who are skilled. And then through the television channels and regional languages across the country, we broadcast it in a big way. We have introduced certain serials where every week on a Sunday between 11 and 12 or between 12 and 1, there's a broadcast of the actual happenings on the ground where the success stories are broadcast in a very big way. I think we are trying to enhance the advocacy in a very big way so that the reach across the country, the length and breadth of the country, makes it meaningful for the youth to see that there is an opportunity, and more importantly, the parents of the children to see that there is an aspirational position and let the child do what he or she is good at. The other one is, of course, introduction of the vocational education in the schools. And then when a teacher identifies a student with the potential for vocational education, catch those school dropouts from the secondary school level and then channelize them into the vocational education. So these are some of the things which we are attempting.
Muchas gracias, señor Subramanian. Una segunda debilidad también compartida.
There's a second weakness that we all share. A weakness in the Spanish system, or rather, in the way the educational system in Spain has been organized and deployed. The results of Spanish education are not in line with the demands of a modern economy. In Spain, we have a high number of university graduates, a high number of people who have no diploma whatsoever or who only have basic skills. And then we have very few people with an intermediate kind of diploma or qualification, vocational qualification and training, which is actually what the market is demanding. As far as I understood your presentation in Japan, this is a very common problem as well. The Japanese speaker did say that almost 50% of Japanese students go to university. I don't know if the situation is the same in Korea. So I'd like to know whether you have the same problem we have in Spain, and if you have that problem, how are you trying to solve it?
Yeah, actually, more students choose to go to general high school than to go to vocational high school when they graduate middle school. And the university is more prestige in Korea than the vocational colleges. That is one of the problem to develop vocational part. The same, almost 80% of the high school graduates go to colleges and universities. That is the highest rates and college entrance rates among the OECD countries. But the skill is neglected, and the knowledge and academic oriented is more strongly in Korea. So to regulate that phenomena, Korea recently made the NCS system. So you develop NCS, each occupation has its own NCS. So when you select and recruit newcomers into the company, you test with the NCS, not whether he's graduated from college or not. So that is one of the methods of the government to emphasize skills than the knowledge or college graduation degree only. Okay.
Gracias, doctora Chang. Una tercera debilidad también.
A third weakness, which is, in my opinion, also shared, or at least its analysis, has to do with how difficult it is to identify existing and future training needs in our economic system, especially at sector-based levels. What mechanisms have you developed in India to identify future training needs in line with the needs of your productive system?
No, like I said in the morning, the sector skill councils or the other councils through the Ministry of Labour and Employment and some of the very specific ministries like the textiles, etc., participate along with the stakeholders, namely the private sector players, the industry players, the small and medium sector enterprises, the industry associations, to define the job roles and the kind of skills that are required for the future. The larger companies contribute quite a bit in terms of their CSR funds, and then enable the training of trainers, the course definitions, the competency levels, and also the certification processes. I think we collaborate in a big way through the OECD, the EU, some of the specific countries from across the world, so that the dual certification and dual recognition becomes a way of life. I think the sector skill councils, along with the labor, plays a very, very critical role in this whole journey of defining. We already have 31 sector skill councils across the different sectors, and we keep introducing newer ones based on the needs. For example, clean energy, if you take. For example, if you take the pharmaceutical industry or the integration of visual computing and the information technology, animation as an example, these are some new skills which I've introduced, and the companies are contributing in a big way for this.
En Corea del Sur.
What about South Korea? Do you have any mechanisms to anticipate training needs? Are these systems integrated? Have they been systematically incorporated in some kind of method? Is it the responsibility of the government or of the social stakeholders? Is there an independent entity or agency trying to forecast training needs in Korea?
Actually, Korea is traditionally a very government-oriented. Government leadership is very strong to, lead the vocational training and economic development. So I think government is the main agents who lead the economic development and vocational training, those things.
Y una cuarta debilidad también.
A fourth weakness we've identified that has a lot to do with the first weakness, and I'm going to quote our vice chairman, and fairly bad image of the Spanish training for work system. So we don't have a very good reputation, mainly because we've had some fraud cases in our country. I mean, fraud. There's been fraud in training. And the media have used these frauds. I mean, they were crazy about it. They were hitting the headlines. I mean, many people believe that this has actually hindered the development of professional training. Is there any fraud in India in vocational training? Is it not one-off thing, or is it systemic fraud? If there's some systemic fraud, how are you fighting against it? How are you combating this fraud, if there is any?
I think where there is money, there is fraud. That's the starting point. So India is no exception. I think we have seen in the vocational training space where we said that for every prior learning or any youth can get certified through certain certification agencies, and they will get paid for getting the certification and training, so that there is a motivation, there is an incentive behind it. Then we said that we must track the jobs as they get so that the employment is necessary. But I think there were fake cases of employment letters, and some of the people certified based on what the money was recoverable from the youth themselves. I think we have taken some very, very strong action in terms of debarring those training providers, in terms of making sure that the certificates and the employment linkages are strengthened further so that we make sure. And being in a federated system, the state level implementation and states being a partner is going to be very critical, and we are engaging with them. So as we are defining the next level of certification, assessment, and the training providers, some of the pitfalls of leakages, including direct payment to the beneficiaries, namely the youth, through the financial inclusion and the bank accounts, so that there are no cash transaction and the money goes directly to the youth, even if it's a government-sponsored or private sector-sponsored. I think any leakages one has to plug, and most of the leakages are through mechanical or manual interventions, which is the order of the day. So cut out the manual intervention by putting it the digital intervention. Wherever you applied the digital technology, the frauds and the leakages automatically come down. I think the largest exercise which we did digitization was the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was sponsored by the previous government. And we just observed one state, Maharashtra, over a 31-year period, what kind of leakages took place. And we put together a digitized platform where we applied that digitized platform for all the citizens-related services through this. And Andhra Pradesh, before the bifurcation, was the first state to deploy it. And we reduced it almost 98% of the beneficiaries got what was due to them instead of almost 50% getting leaked in the past. So these were some interventions. So technology plays a very, very critical role, and taking action the moment you detect some of these frauds and involving the stakeholders is absolutely key. And with the social media and mobile in the hand of every youth, any happening where there is a misdeed can be reported immediately. We can upload it to a back office center where you can take action appropriately.
Thank you very much. And in Korea?
Actually, there are so many private training institutions in Korea, like, far more than private institutions than public. So the quality of the training is various kinds. So, to control the training level and the quality of the training, vocational training, the government is usually, made a consortium of the training institutions, and they have their own standards of the testing, qualification testing. So the qualification testing is reflect the national competency standards developed by the government, and this is gonna control the qualification, and private qualifications are controlled and assessed by the government as well, the Ministry of Labor. So unless it reached a certain level of quality, they don't realize as a formal qualification. So there are many private certificates, but which is not accredited formally. Yeah.
Muchas gracias, doctora Cham. Y también para ambos.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chan. And I have a question for both of you, followed by a comment and then two questions. You've explained different on-the-job training models. And apparently you're both very proud of these models, and I'm sure you have plenty of reasons to be proud of those models. As far as we understood you, in your opinion, these systems account for an important part of the success in your countries, economic success in your countries, but I am sure that not everything is rosy, because change is always characterized by uncertainty and fear. Can you share some lessons with us, some mistakes you might have made in the past that you would like us to not to make? India, for instance. Some bad practices we shouldn't be following.
The first mistake one makes is not trying anything. So because some frauds are going to happen, because something is going to fail, so let's not do anything. That's the first mistake. Like children learn by doing, we got to do it and learn it very quickly and correct it as quickly as possible. That's lesson number one. Second is you have to involve a lot more stakeholders, which means you have to talk about it, talk about the success a lot more than media, which generally talks about the problems. So the only way to counter the media where they are talking negative things, because that's what makes a story, is to use the social media for successes to be broadcast and then retweet it or rebroadcast it, so that there is another channel of communication where the real happenings, positive feedback is given continuously. I think the voice of the youth has to be heard from the youth themselves instead of my conjecturing this what I think is happening without knowing the realities on the ground. So involve and engage the stakeholders in a very big way. Mistakes are going to happen. It's like a Silicon Valley. Out of one successful startup, how many of them fail? I think I got to try hundreds of ideas, and the government, the parents, the youth, the training providers, private sector must accept the risk of failure as a way of life, as a way of business and a business model. And that's what we are experimenting. We know there are going to be unsuccessful attempts, but if you don't try, you're not going to make a success of it. You learn by the mistakes and then keep correcting it. Don't make costly mistakes, don't repeat the mistakes. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. And, bueno, escuchando a la doctora Chang,
Listening to Dr. Shan this morning, I felt like moving to Korea. I want to live there. You described a rational, well-structured system, which is competitive. I mean, where's the catch? Isn't there a mistake there or a flaw in the system?
Korea. Actually, Korean government leadership has been always strong, and one of the strong leadership was the compulsory education. And in the educational system, it was very successful, I think. Like, 6 years of compulsory primary education and another 3 years of middle school compulsory education was successful. But for vocational training, the compulsory vocational training was implemented by the government, but it couldn't be, successful because the government didn't realize the reality of the budget and the environment. So compulsory is not always successful. And also, on the other hand, vocational high school system, like, you can choose when you graduate middle school to go to general high school or vocational high school. But most of the student parents choose to general high school than the vocational track. So the vocational education was the quality was quite low in the meantime, like 2000 something. So from 2007 and 2008, government started another policy to strengthening the vocational high school. So it introduced Meister High School. Meister is a German term, as you know, it's a master. So you can make a Meister even you have a strong vocational high school education. It's just a young Meister who is going to be a master in the long time in the future. But anyhow, the Meister High School, the government supported a lot of money to establish and manage the Meister High School, the best quality facility and best curriculum, best teaching staff, and even CEO, the principal coming from enterprises. So the quality of the education was much improved for the Meister High School in Korea now. So they get excellent students as well. So I think the budget, financial support is very important to improve and maintain the good policy. Yeah.
Gracias, doctora Chan. Yo, el catálogo de...
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Shan. I've run out of possible agreements. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions or comments. I mean, you could perhaps share some comments with us, or questions or ideas. But you're not a member of the board, Ricardo. Well, perhaps you'll become one. I have a question. Out of curiosity, I'd like to ask the following question. What is the influence both in Korea and India of new technologies? For instance, e-commerce that's skyrocketing in Europe and the US. And jobs, new jobs such as community managers. Is there a lot of training demand for those jobs?
Yes, because of the new technology and automation, I think the number of jobs are decreasing. So that is one of the reasons why the unemployment rate is increasing. But the vocational training, the level of vocational training provided by the providers is also upgrading. So these days, even not only the college level, but also the graduate level of training and education is increasing these days. So Korea, KAIST is a Korea Academic Institute of Science and Technology. That was established in 1990s to support the high-skilled level at the time. But these days, they produce the high-quality, high-skilled persons, but also recently more creative competency is stressed to in the educational system. So not only memorize and follow the tradition, but also the creativity is more important to lead the economy and new technology and high technology.
I think the e-commerce startups are one of the highest in the world in India today. Enormous amount of money is flowing into the e-commerce segment, and most of the youth coming out of the technical engineering colleges want to start up an e-commerce company. I think the valuations of these companies are again skyrocketing, even though the revenue model is only spend money and we'll see later. So that's the model that's working. So I think we're going to see some successes, whether it's in the retail space, whether it's in the back-end connectivity, logistics, order fulfillment, etc. Even the large corporations are getting into the e-commerce space to disrupt their own models. I think we are seeing the most vibrant e-commerce environment in India today. I think Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley startups have all set up shop in India. They are also attracting funds, and they are also enabling e-commerce activity. I think it's the most vibrant space as we see it today. But the back end is very well integrated because of the IT capabilities we have done over the last 40, 45 years. So the result is the back end, the BPOs, the end-to-end connectivity and order fulfillment are becoming a lot more easier. So today, I think most of us, through any grocery, any books, any of the film downloading, music downloading, I think amongst the youth, it's the highest penetration in the e-commerce space.
¿Algún comentario más?
Are there any further comments? Mr. Jesus Barroso is the Deputy Director for Active Policies, a member of the Foundation's Board of Trustees. Thank you very much and good afternoon. I'd like to share an idea, a comment with you. So I'm kind of thinking aloud. I have a critical and optimistic idea I'd like to share with you. I mean, we've learned a lot today in meetings of this sort, we learned a great deal, even if we're told about countries that have nothing to do with ours. We have so much to learn from India or from Korea. I mean, they have millions of highly qualified workers there, experts in new technologies, on CIT technologies, open to new initiatives, and willing to do new things. So Spanish entrepreneurs have a lot to learn from their Indian counterparts. Japan has a system that has nothing to do with ours. We do admire their loyalty, their institutional loyalty, this permanent and close link between workers and companies, a Japanese model that would be impossible to implement in Spain. But obviously, the Japanese economic success has a lot to teach us. There's a lot to learn there. Perhaps we have more commonalities with Korea in the area of vocational training. The design, the theoretical design of training in Korea is very similar to the Spanish system. In the vocational education and training framework, we actually have the same system based on the national qualification system, where there's a very clear line between the education managed by the Ministry of Education and on the job training, which is in the hands of the Ministry of Labor. And all that training is perfectly certified. I envy the Korean model, a country that in the past 60 years has developed spectacularly. It now has powerful multinational companies leading their respective sectors. And in my opinion, this has a lot to do with government leadership. I understand, or I believe that it's not only the government, but the whole of the population looking at the same national goal or objective. So, in my opinion, I mean, you've told us before that young Korean people were willing to work hard for their families and for their countries and for their companies. A very clear example of an education that's based on hard work and effort. It is difficult to explain the situation in Spain. We do have the technical knowledge. We do have the legal instruments we need and the economic resources. We have highly qualified people. However, there is something missing: leadership. We don't have a clear idea. We don't have a shared story about our country to tell us what we need to do and how training needs to be organized so that young people from the very beginning are made aware of the fact that hard work is the only way to improve. The prestige of training or the reputation of training, I mean, there's education given to young people, formal education, which is different from lifelong training or on-the-job training or training for the unemployed. I mean, we use the same term, training, but we're talking about different things. I mean, the secret of the Korean success lies on their educational system, on the fact that they actually know what their destination is, what their goals are. And we have a lot to learn from them. We do have, as I said before, the resources. We do have highly qualified workers. We've been told about the new job security system in Korea. In Spain, unemployment contributions, it's only 7.5%. I mean, workers pay as much as 7% of their salary for employment safety. We do have a great deal of employment policies, but most of them are passive policies. Up to 30 billion euros every year are used to pay unemployment benefits. And therefore, the country has fewer resources for other areas and for other initiatives or more productive goals. Nevertheless, my message is an optimistic message. What we need to do, we need to be able to make full use, or we should do our best to improve the education and training system. There shouldn't be any rivalry between the central government and the different companies providing training. And above all, there's something that we should be able to do. We need to develop an apprenticeship model. I mean, in the past in Spain, we didn't have any apprenticeships. I mean, you learned a trade by on-the-job training. But in my opinion, it would be essential to recover this or to implement this kind of training, apprenticeships. It is perfectly possible to introduce this training both for active workers and job seekers. Spanish companies will never be competitive, regardless of how much they invest in on-the-job training, if new recruits, if the company's employees are not properly qualified and trained. Our priority should always be to provide young people in Spain with the right training, a training that our system can actually give them, because we have the necessary economic resources and we have highly qualified people, but we've been unable to organize all this due to structural problems.
And we've got to assess all these things. We've got to have a clear idea of where we want to go and where we want to get. And if we promote training in companies, in the future it must be training in companies. The rest will become complementary or supplementary training forms, or forms of training. So training should be designed with different programs, with different scopes, with different aims and objectives. In training, you can offer certain things, you can offer training, but if you haven't got the people that require that training, it's no good. And if you just do it to go through the motions, you are using public money inefficiently. So this is absolutely key. But we have the knowledge, we have the means, we have the people. We've got to be able to follow the example of other countries where, on the basis of a common idea of developing a country, of defending and strengthening the country, we can overcome our differences. And in terms of training, which has brought us together here today, we can learn from good practices of others and apply them here. And let's forget about fictions and things that are not true. Vocational training, I no longer share the idea that it's not prestigious, because if you get a better job and a better salary, we in this country in the 60s, the middle classes exploded really, and there was tremendous development. And if you got a university degree at that time, you had a higher position. That is no longer the case. But we have to make this a reality. Those of us who are responsible for policies should think it absolutely normal for our children to do vocational training. Or in Germany, where a young person might finish their secondary education and go into vocational training and do one thing and then do the other. Let's comply with this, because we have very good ideas in Spain, but sometimes we haven't got the mechanisms. When we send our children to be trained, we must expect from them a will to learn and to develop and decide what they want to do. Once we preach practice what we preach, I think that the social prestige of vocational training will be greater. It's not that we've got too many university graduates in Spain, no. We comply with what the 2020 European strategy lays down about or defines for university training. But where we're missing people is in the intermediate stages. And we've got to have university students who have training that really fits in with what society needs. If we don't do that, if we don't focus on that, on working for the family, working for the country, and with clear leadership, we will not be able to change training. So the message is critical and at the same time optimistic, because we have the means, the resources, and the people, and we can comply with this. Well, thank you very much, Subdirector, for your critical, optimistic series of thoughts. I would like to underline two things. One of them, for a final comment, brief comment from our guests, because we are delayed once again. One of the things that I think is important that you've said is that you said that at meetings like this we learn a lot. That is true. The second thing that you've said is important is about leadership. Dr. Chung has given us a very good example of leadership, and which I think was very, which has its roots in the culture of the Korean people, hasn't been imposed upon anybody. It has resulted from the people. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. Dr. Chung, the leadership of your government, is it accepted socially or is it imposed?
Well, yes. The government leadership, we happened to have a strong leadership at one time, and at the time, actually, the Park Jong-hee, who is the father of present president, and he was at the time notorious for his dictatorship, but recently we reevaluate him for his economic achievement. So his leadership, for the economic development, he was very good. He did a good performance, but as a political leadership, he was too strong, and it's kind of dictatorship. Anyhow, the leadership is, I think, is delicate to judge whether it's successful or not. But anyhow, in the economic perspective, he was a strong leadership, and he led the nation to follow. And at the time, actually, he made a brainwash song. Every people follow that song every day when you wake up. It comes out through the broadcasting. And when you go to school, we sing together the brainwash song to work hard, to study hard, to that kind of song. And also, we had a cultural factor to support, to follow the leadership. Because, Confucian culture emphasized on loyalty to nation and the family, and the nation could be the government. It's a kind of different, but anyhow, that worked. So that was the situation at the time. So I think actually Spain is a very big country and has a very developed economy and has a long tradition and very strong country, I think. So today you are very modesty. So I think, so actually we Korea have to learn the Spain case because you have many cultural strength and very good tradition. So yeah, anyhow, that's what I think.
La doctora Chan demuestra no solo un gran...
Oh, Dr. Chung is very knowledgeable and very diplomatic. Mr. Subramanian, in India there is leadership. Is it resonant? Is it exquisite? Is it subtle? Is it formal? What's the leadership in India?
No, with our recent elections about a year ago, I think the leadership is extremely visible and extremely communicative virtually on a daily basis, including through Twitter and social media. If you just open the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, or any of the ministers, the number of tweets, probably they are more than the private sector. The number of followers are also much more than before. So there is an enormous amount of communication and leadership by communicating, and very, very simple forms of communication so that there's no confusion in the communication itself. But I think just to add, what are the learnings from this whole dialogue, this whole day? I think it's a very, very good learning environment, both through what we learned from the Spain, Koreans, or the Japanese, and the Indian examples. But I think a couple of things leads me to say that the world is a lot more complex than before. The world is a lot more connected than before. The information asymmetry across the globe is disappearing very, very fast. And the role of leadership, where information is available to everybody, you cannot get away by communicating the wrong messages because you get found out very, very quickly and instantaneously because of this information asymmetry being not there. How do you connect the public-private partnership, which is becoming a way of life, where the corporate, the individuals, the NGOs, the social sector, all have to be a part of the ecosystem? It's not the government's job, or it's not the private sector's job alone. I think the social media is again becoming very visible, and that's another way. The government needs to work with the infrastructure that is needed for creativity and innovation, and how do you champion that for scale-up deployment? The market forces must operate, because with the information asymmetry being removed, the youth will know, they are intelligent enough to know, or I am intelligent enough to know what is good for me, or is it something which I want to try with the attendant risks. And I think the social protection cannot be understated. There is a need for a social protection, but that's being addressed through what we call as the corporate social responsibility. Profit-making organization or the high net worth individuals must share a piece of their profit. A number of examples are there on a global basis. We can learn from that and apply it on the ground. That will be my summary. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Subramanian. I'm going to be ejected because we are running late. So I'm going to finish and say how proud I am to have tried to chair, to stimulate this panel discussion with these relevant speakers, and it's been really wonderful to be here with them and to hear from them. And thank you very much for your valuable time. You can consider yourselves our friends. Thank you very much.
Moderator on all our behalf, nobody thanked him.
Muchas gracias, señora Chung.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chung, Mr. Subramanian.